Hey there, fuckers. Today we are here for another Back to Basics episode talking about trauma brain and the good news paradox. Does it sound like a band name? Yeah, it kind of sounds like a band name. All right, here we go. Observation that you might also eventually have. When life gets, quote, better, traumatized brains often behave worse. A positively implicated event arrives, and so does the anxiety, depression, self sabotage, etc. What was positive now somehow creates adversity. First, it happens psychologically and emotionally, and then materially. It filters into the rest of our lives. A real storm rolls in. And the aftermath of that storm is often a whole new trauma obstacle. So, why does this happen? Why do we do it? When the forecast is sunny and bright, why is our inner world often a dark, dank hurricane? Well, first of all, let us first mention asceticism, life that's purposely devoid of joy or pleasure for the self protection of the individual or some sense of piety. If you want to learn a lot more about that, just check out the recent episode we did on the topic. But secondly, let's say the traumatized motherfucker's classic answer: conditioning and rigidity. In other words, the brain noted that good events resulted in at least one negative outcome at some point in the past, and then it overgeneralized or abundantly applied that lesson to a myriad of other circumstances so that it wouldn't be surprised in the future. It does this by creating a rule or belief or instructional system stating that A always leads to B for a sense of safety and control. In other words, yeah, it's a trauma thought. You might want to check out another recent episode on identifying trauma thoughts, which recently came out in the last week. But besides those answers, what else? Another traumatized motherfuckers classic is discussing the self protection of the trauma brain against the threat of hope. Because what often follows hope is disappointment. And what's more impactful, hope or disappointment? For us, the answer is disappointment. But why? Well, I've got three quick answers for you. Negativity bias. The letdown is greater than the climb up. And number three, excruciating yet relieving confirmation of prior beliefs. So, first of all, yeah, negativity bias. You know this already. Brains are developed to prioritize their attention on negatives, risks, and danger to keep us alive. So, if you give it a good sign, it might preemptively seek the taint for your own protection. Number two, the letdown of disappointment is greater than the climb up of hope. This is where I'm going to recommend, as usual, that you are watching the video to see my graphic here. But let's say you start at a neutral point. Hope comes in and it lifts you way up into the clouds where you say, wow, is this joy I'm experiencing? And then there's crushing disappointment, which pulls you all the way down past the grounded level you started at and into hell. So, in this case, hope is less satisfying or significant than the come down of disappointment after hope, because the hope brought you up and the disappointment dropped you down lower than where you originally started. So the emotional roller coaster is greater on the decline than it was on the incline. Thus, disappointment overrides hope, and we go ahead and freak ourselves out every time something good might be happening. And number 3, excruciating yet relieving confirmation of prior beliefs. Here we have a brain that says, life is hell. And then it says, huzzah, I fucking knew I was right, after it goes through some suffering. So, just a side note here that brains love to be correct, no matter the context. You may be able to recollect some people in your life who actively celebrate when something bad happens, quote, because they knew that it would. It actually makes them excited and happy for negative events to take place if they were able to predict those negative events. Does that bring anyone to mind in your world? I can think of about 5 people. Moving on. Surprise reason number 4 that we have the paradox of good news leading to bad times. It's a doozy, and as usual, I will warn you that you might hate it. But number 4 is the threat of an entire trauma life narrative and understanding of existence being disrupted when something positive happens. I.e., if all you've ever known has been poverty and financial struggle has dictated your life course, your relationships, your residences, your beliefs, your entire identity, and your daily behaviors, the way that you navigate the world day after day, well, then a sudden influx of money or financial stability can send a brain reeling. It has to ask, now what? Who am I? What is my place? How do I live? And what does this mean about everything that has already happened under the prior circumstances of financial struggle? All the ways that I've survived this far, everything that I did as a trauma adaptation, did it need to happen? Why did I do it? And what does it mean about the future? So, again, another point where I'm going to encourage you to check out my graphic. We have a scared, confused looking brain looking at the past life course and asking, was any of this necessary? And looking forward at an equally tumultuous and red fear colored future. It's asking, how do I live after this? So, although it's a bright, shiny future, it's also unfamiliar as compared to the traumatic past of suffering. And that scares us. It leaves us to ask, who am I if my life isn't defined by insert negative conditions that have defined my experience so far? It is a fearful question, and the answer is going to take a long time for an individual to find out, right? So that leaves the brain without a foundation or a direction in the meantime, and that's extremely painful. Now, little side note. Not to say that positive events are, quote, traumatic to a traumatized brain, but trauma is events that are so outside the brain's normal experience or understanding of life that it cannot process them into a coherent story. And that is pretty goddamn similar to the trauma brain malfunction that takes place in light of positive news, wouldn't you say? It's a complete shift from everything it understood before, and that does throw it into errors in processing, which lead to a lot of problems. So again, there's a brain studying everything I've ever understood or experienced in the past. It is a scholar. It is an expert. It knows this forwards and backwards. And then there's a positively implicated event. And the brain is left to just question, now what? What the fuck is this? What does this mean about the subject that I thought I knew so well? And so we have negative emotional reactions, preemptive panic, a deep sense of confusion, or even derealization, and difficulty processing or accepting the news. And so there's a potential uprising of prior traumatic memories suddenly being brought to the forefront of the mind. There's self scorn for past trauma behaviors and decisions. There are subconscious disruptions of attention, energy usage, and functioning. And there might be this recollective hangover, these trauma fever dreams taking place that leave a person completely discombobulated. And so we often turn to self sabotage to, quote, return the universe to order again. Subconscious memories, preemptive negative emotions, doubts about self worth and deservedness, fear and confusion about the future, they all lead to feelings, thoughts, and behaviors that ruin the positively implicated event and or restore traumatic conditions for the individual. Let's go into some examples. Maybe you get a great job opportunity. It leads to being overrun by negative emotions, fears, doubts about how life and the self will have to alter in light of this news. Maybe you forget to finish your employment documents, which is an example of self passive aggression, if you recall that episode. Thus, the opportunity is lost, and the old way of living and the life narrative is safe. Another example, maybe you get a sudden influx of cash monies. It leads to a negative mood, dread, and insomnia, narratives of unworthiness. This perhaps snowballs into an abrupt health failure. All of the money is suddenly necessary for remedies and treatment. And the old way of living and life narrative is, again, safe. Another example, maybe you get a great rental in an excellent location, far away from old tormentors. For instance, an abusive ex or family of origin. It leads to, again, doubts about deservedness, loss of reasons for chaos in life, which probably were informing a lot of daily behaviors and decisions. So maybe you end up getting in a costly car accident and fail to submit the deposit on the rental. Guess what? Old way of living and life narrative, again, has been saved. And finally, example, you get any fucking good news whatsoever. It leads to punishing the self and surrounding people so that a very different variety of suffering occurs. Maybe you drive your friends away, lose a job, your home, etc. And yeah, guess what fucking happens? The old way of living and life narrative is safe. In other words, I'm saying often a trauma brain would rather maintain the misery that it knows than to experience improvements in quality of life that are foreign, behaviorally disrupting, challenging to its prior understanding of self, or disrupting to its entire story of existence. Your brain says, life is hell, and burning is all I've ever known. Huzzah! Everything makes sense. I understand my future of suffering based on my past. I know who I am, what I'm worth. All my behaviors and decisions were and continue to be justified into the future. Now that's the reality that I know how to struggle through. And in a fucked up way, that is comforting. Cheers, says your drama brain. And that is Trauma Brain and the Good News Paradox. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints? pop them down in the comments. I look forward to hearing from you. And until we speak again next time, hail yourself. Hail your positively implicated events. Don't fuck them up. You deserve them, and you will figure out how to navigate them with time. Just take care of yourself with self-compassion until you do. You'll form a new life narrative, a new sense of self, and your behaviors will adapt in a positive way, maybe for the rest of your less traumatized life. Till we speak again, fuckers, cheers, and I'll talk to you soon.